So after I've done a brief introduction, Professor Tim Yates is going to go through where we are with regard to the research, the interim findings with the research, and then it's a pleasure then to introduce Sarah Woolley, who's going to talk through the work that she's been doing with VM Virgin Media O2 at Wythenshawe Housings. So it's a pretty packed agenda. Then Sim will summarise, and then there'll be the opportunity for you to ask questions at the end, and we'll try and answer those. So without further ado, let me just kick off in terms of background. I don't know how many of you actually were able to attend the first session of this. So what I thought I would do would be to recap a little bit about what we are looking to do as part of these pilots, and then give you a little bit of a summary of the sorts of issues that we're coming across at kind of like a strategic level, which I hope will then segue quite neatly into the further findings now that Sim has got has uncovered through the further focus groups that he's been doing. So let me just share this presentation.
Just before we start,
yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Bina Puri, Innovations and Partnership Lead at Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Just wanted to note we will be recording this session for anyone that cannot make it today, but we want to make sure that we can share this evidence base and research more broadly. If you're not comfortable with being on camera, please feel free to switch off your cameras, but there'll also be time for questions at the end, so we would encourage you to get involved. And again, thank you for attending today.
Oh, that's great. And also thanks, Bina. If you'd like to introduce yourselves in the chat as well, that would be good. So it'd be good to get kind of a feel for who's in this virtual room as well, for everybody who's attending. So if you can do that, that would be fantastic. So a little bit of context then in terms of why we are doing this pilot. We've done a lot of research in Greater Manchester on digital inclusion over the last 2 years, and really a lot of it's been driven by the pandemic, although we did look at that well before then. And this research revealed that around about 40% of Greater Manchester residents are digitally excluded in some way. That equates here to about 1.2 million people. Around about 52% of those offline can spend, about £300 a year on utilities, but they don't necessarily have the ability to share data on utilities online, and all sorts of issues that come out of people not actually being online, which I'm sure many of you who are listening in will be aware of. But in social housing, the situation's worse. Now, 20% of Greater Manchester residents do live in social housing, but we think that we estimate that up to 60% of those people who live in social housing are disadvantaged in some way. And the purpose of this pilot that we're doing here is very much to test a lot of these assumptions as well, and we're looking to share those with you, so you can learn that, or as we learn, what we find on the ground. So what was the original purpose of the social housing pilots? Originally, what we were looking to do was look to the extent to which the market could stretch commercially to provide long-term solutions to address digital inclusion. And we knew that some market players had looked at social tariffs, and others were really kind of a bit more on the fringe of it. But we really wanted to test the extent to which this could happen on a long-term basis. The problem with the pandemic was it very much short-termism, firefighting. We were getting donations of kit to help people, for example. But problem was, how do we actually make sure that this lasts beyond the pandemic? So that was really the purpose of the social housing pilot, to look at how we could work closely with the market to do that. And looking therefore at the role of the social housing provider in doing that, the role of the internet service provider, and the role of the local authority as well. And in line with our digital inclusion agenda, which is very much led by Andy Byrne, we wanted to look at particular target groups too, as part of these pilots: over 75, disabled groups, and young people. And with a view then to having developed a model that we could roll out across the whole of Greater Manchester. And around about 260,000 social housing premises in Greater Manchester. What does a rollout look like on that kind of scale? And kind of as a flip side of the number one here is, well, if there is market failure, what public interventions are actually needed? And therefore, how can we create an evidence base that enables us to then lobby for action on that basis? So that was the purpose really of the pilots. And this session really, you will get insights into how the evidence base now is stacking up. And it would be great, if you can share in your questions further on around the sorts of experiences you've got that might feed into this as well. So a little bit of summary of the pilots. We've got 5 across Greater Manchester. 2 are in Manchester. We've got 1 in Bolton, 1 in Stockport, and 1 in Wigan. And what we've done, we've matched up 5 social housing providers with the 5 largest, most significant internet service providers in the UK. And we understand it's one of the largest pilots that's been ever undertaken in Europe. And nobody's ever really brought together industry in this kind of way. So the pilots are, we're looking at pilot size around about 1,000 in each of these areas, total of 5,000 across those pilot areas. Different property types, some are in multi-occupier buildings, some in single, you can see there, and different target groups depending on the area as well. So what we want to do is make sure that we capture a good sense as to what is happening across, a cross section, I suppose. Timeline. December last year, 12 months ago, we started out on this venture, and the partners we put in place December last year. We've now been working with these partners for that 12 months, developing expressions of interest, looking at what an offer might look like, what's the digital inclusion safety net look like, because what we concluded was that what could happen if we were able to aggregate demand for those people who could afford to pay within social housing, and then therefore create a safety net through for those people who can't afford to connect. So there was a commercial model that actually worked. That was the intention here. And so we've been really looking at what that digital inclusion safety net looks like. The option, I'll come into that in a little bit. We had an official programme launch at Connected Britain in September, and we commissioned research from Tim Yates back in September. So the pilots are in place. The offers have now been close to being finalised now, and from January to March next year, we're looking at full implementation of this with an evaluation of the research from the end of March next year, which will then feed into the large-scale rollout across Greater Manchester social housing providers. So that's our timeline that we are working to. So let me give you a sense of the kind of like the strategic issues that are emerging here as we've gone through this. And I would add that both the social housing providers and the market players have all treated it as a discovery piece. So there'll be a pivot where things aren't working. They've also looked at how they might change things or refine things depending on the initial findings. So the sorts of offers that are now being looked at across these 5 areas. Now, they all vary because they've got different providers, but certainly the connection of community hubs to promote the offers is a key thing. Volunteer support from internet service providers includes offers that are being made. Many are offering social tariffs too, and in some cases targeted reduced tariffs to those people who the social housing providers deem to be in most need. Looked at skills and confidence support as well. So that's kind of give you a flavour of the sort of offer and activities we've been looking at here. Emerging challenges have been from the internet service provider. They've really struggled in some cases to get connectivity in, and this has been a lot because of some of the administration, the challenges on specifications and wayleaves. So what we've been doing is working with the social housing providers and the internet service providers to come up with an agreement on that. But that's one of the challenges that have been identified. Data has also been another problem. How you actually target particular groups without the data. How do you find out who's on benefit and who isn't? And also the challenge of wider data sharing and the way in which the law works at the moment has been a challenge. And also I would add that the capacity of social housing providers to manage implementation has also emerged as a challenge. I think Sim's going to refer to that later on too. So an emerging learning is continuing. So certainly we're looking at the role of health services and how we do this. And the impacts of the cost of living crisis now has also changed some of the challenges that we've been facing, in particular around how we deal with other utilities and the opportunities around how we work with other utilities to address some of the challenges we find. And I suppose the need for a digital infrastructure expertise pool for social housing providers as well as been identified too. So I'll stop that there, and these kind of learning will continue as we move forward with these pilots. And I suppose just to summarise where we are and how these interrelationships work, we've got the internet service provider really looking at, well, how can we make it sustainable with a commercial opportunity there on the left-hand side. There's also an element of responsible business for the social housing, for the internet service provider too. And then at the bottom there, we've got the housing provider themselves and service they're delivering together with the local authorities and where local government intervention is needed. And this is where the social housing pilots sit in the middle of all of this. And the purpose of this particular exercise is to determine what that looks like, what the role of those individual partners could be, how they could be optimized, and then what a sustainable model looks like. So what I'll do, I'll stop there, and I think that neatly segues into some of the findings that that Sim is now going to talk about. So Sim, over to you.
Hello everybody. Actually, for a minute, I'm just going to turn, I've got a fan heater on here and it's a bit noisy. I'm going to turn that off first. Lots of discussions in this house about whether the heating should be on or off. Anyway, let me get my slides up. 1 second. Can everyone see that okay? Yeah, good. Yes. Okay. So I know some colleagues around the table will have seen the stuff we presented a few weeks ago. This time there's not going to be lots of numbers and graphs because we've been talking to people, so we've got lots of words. Some of you may see your words or points you made if some of the social housing providers are around the table. It's all been anonymized, so you've not got your name attached to it. Unless you want to come in and say that was me, and I really think that is the case. It's all been anonymized. We've not quite finished all of the analysis and everything because it's only a week so since we've finished some of this stuff, and we're still ongoing with some of the focus groups with tenants. So this is kind of where we're at. So he says confidently, there we go. So where we are so far, we've talked to the kind of the social housing providers in all 5 of the areas. We've been doing focus groups, or if it's worked a different way, with individual interviews with residents in all 5 areas now. We've got some really good insights, but some of the recruitment numbers were quite low. It is quite hard to get people living in social housing areas to, you know, come out on a cold December day for focus groups and so on. So we are reflecting on whether we might want to do a second round and think about how we might work that well. We have been trying to use events where residents would come anyway and so on, which has been successful in some and okay in others. But we might have another go round to get a little bit more. And our resident survey is either ready to go or it's been rolled out a bit with some of the focus groups. So that's where we're at. We want to talk to the ISPs themselves from that, get stuff from their perspective. So we'll be sending out invitations to the relevant kind of ISP representatives for some interviews after Christmas. And then end of January, we would hopefully have some more data from the survey and from the focus groups. So that's where we're at practically. Just a quick advert for something else. Just so you'll be aware, we've also got this national minimum digital living standards project going on with a separately funded Welsh branded version to look at the specific needs of the Welsh nation. All of that work's complete, and we will be doing a launch event in February to present those results nationally. We will make sure that invite gets out to people here on the Greater Manchester pilot as well, because we think there's some real close connections between those two projects, after which we'll be nationally surveying the UK to see how many households are above or below that standard. So I thought it's going to be wordy, but I'll try and be as quick as I can. Some initial findings. I mean, all of the social housing providers we spoke to talked about how digital inclusion cross-cuts lots of their different operational aspects. You know, whether it's the IT department, the customer services team in terms of engaging with people, engagement teams on the ground, facilities management, asset management, and so on. So it's something that cuts across lots and lots of the organizations, but they've got different levels of kind of how it's integrated. And, you know, this is not a criticism, because I think it's something I say quite a lot, and Bina quotes me on this one quite a lot, you know, because digital inclusion ends up being everybody's problem, but it doesn't quite live in one place. So we really did get the feeling that, you know, this is a challenge for organizations that have got a lot of day-to-day face-to-face work to do to integrate the digital inclusion work across the portfolio. But everybody was trying to look at how that kind of linked across these multiple functions. You know, if you're wanting to put cabling into a tower block to get digital into that community, that's with your facilities team. But getting the people to engage with that service when it arrives might be your engagement team or your customer service team, and so on. So having some support for that, or some integration for it, or some best practice to look at in other places, came over as something that would be useful. But it's not like social housing providers have had no idea about digital inclusion issues, then suddenly they found about it when the pilot started or when COVID happened. Quite the opposite. You know, my own research work started with, you know, Sheffield Homes in the early 2000s on this. I mean, people living in social housing are, you know, the kind of target audience, if you want to use that phrase, for digital inclusion stuff. So everybody's already been doing something. There's an example there from Stockport, etc. But what everybody did talk about was the real challenge of making it long-term and sustainable. That often there was a funding opportunity, so you would use that to do some digital inclusion, or there was an offer from a provider, but it might be 6 months long, etc., and so on. So getting a long-term sustainable solution is something that everybody's struggling with, you know, and so on. But also what really did come across from all of the interviews for social housing providers, that it's not just the digital technologies, you know, getting the wire to the house or the data package to the people on mobile devices is just part of it, you know. And so, you know, giving people a whole range of opportunities, not just to get skills, but to connect, to see the value of being engaged, to get something positive out of their digital use, clearly came across as part of what they were trying to achieve. Often working with other organizations, you know, with digital inclusion support providers or with community groups and so on, so that if you're going to have a plan, it can't just be here's connection. There's got to be and that could be really community varied and circumstance and so on, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But the other thing we did really appreciate and we could really hear from people was just the frontline realities at the moment. You know, people working on the front lines in social housing are dealing with a cost of living crisis. They're dealing with people who don't have heating. They're dealing with a whole variety of issues, which have had some real profound effects on people. So the resources to do that and do digital inclusion and do well-being and do other stuff is really, really tough, you know. And I think we do really appreciate the effort people are putting to help us with the research work and recruit people and so on, and also the enthusiasm for it when we can see they're also dealing with these kind of issues and being on the ground doing the focus groups, you know, sitting in a subsidized food bank place in Wigan or somewhere, etc. It just shows the, you know, the stuff that people are dealing with on the ground. And we did know, you know, that you're also dealing with little and large crises all the time for people, which may or may not have a digital component. And that is a challenge for rolling out solutions, because you're firefighting whilst trying to put something longer term in place. There was a lot of positive comments about having GM on board, having Greater Manchester on board. That's also negotiated access to the internet service providers, but also other organisations. You know, has been proved helpful for some social housing providers because it's given them some backing for the conversations that they want to have. So I think there's something in there about social in doing this kind of work, this kind of interventions, that the social housing providers have got a partner, whether it's local government or regional government or, you know, devolved government, whatever, that can back them in those discussions, so that, you know, they're not operating on their own. I'll put it this way: relationships with ISPs across the piece is varied and complicated. All the ISPs are slightly offering different offers to different internet service providers, and now things are happening on the ground. I do think people are trying to see how what's being offered best matches their tenants and their context and their communities, and it's only in trying to make them work that we can see whether they work or not, or what would be the best offer. So, I mean, I've used this example before, you know, a mobile only offer, you know, data offer, probably great for younger people, not for older people. You know, fixed broadband where you don't have to do anything to the building, you know, is great for a kind of standard social tariff. But if you're going to have to put wires in the building or whatever, then that's a different kind of relationship and a different offer. So I think if we were going to do this again, so I'm saying this is not a criticism, it's a comment, if we're going to do it again, there might be some thought and work has to go into what are the potential commercial offers and how do they fit with the realities on the ground. But I don't think we'd have known that without having to go and then having the conversations and finding things out. So it's just, it is a thing, you know. So, but overall, I think the feedback was that being able to have the discussions with the ISPs, having the backing of GM, and trying to think about longer term solutions in those discussions has been useful for social housing providers. They can tell me I'm wrong, but that's what we've interpreted from what you've said. You know, if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. Some other things. So social housing providers do all seem to want to see what each other learns from this, so that they can all do some, you know, shared best practice, shared understandings. And they're all trying to get their services to meet their tenants' needs, you know, and especially the fact that the tenants' needs are quite complicated, because it's not just, there are different ages, different life stages, different housing situations, different geographic spread. You know, some are clustered very closely together, others are distributed over distance. That, you know, longer term planning's probably got to take some of that into account. And I think it does have a consequence, and I'll mention that in a moment. Again, a learning for a next stage is now we've learned some stuff. I think you could start from to use a phrase, you know, if you're going to do this journey, I wouldn't start from here. You know, I think next time we would start from a kind of more informed place, which would address some of the issues. But that was the point of doing this work, to find where the most informed place to start something from would be. Everybody's also not just looking at solutions that are offered by the pilot. And I don't mean that again as a criticism, but, you know, talking to the different social housing providers, they're also looking at solutions with other partners, whether that's an infrastructure solution or a training solution or a community engagement type solution that will deliver some digital inclusion. They're not just looking at what is being provided by the 5 ISPs. Some of these include network solutions like altnets. You know, we know there's a project in Rochdale. Some of the other social housing providers are looking at those kind of solutions where, you know, you build a local network. We also know of projects in places like Chicago. We've got some research colleagues over there. And also, interestingly, in Sheffield, where I started this kind of digital inclusion journey and research, where people are looking at kind of completely bypassing the current infrastructure, because a self-managed whatever infrastructure might be more useful or leverage more opportunity for the social housing provider, local authority, but it comes with a whole pile of other issues. So those things are clearly being looked at, because there is pressure to solve the problem. So just to summarize all of that, offers need to fit tenant needs. Mobile only maybe for younger people, broadband matter for older people. There's a mixed awareness of social tariffs. Not everybody, this is from some of the focus groups rather than just talking to the social housing providers, they're talking to the tenants. Not everybody's aware they exist. Not all people who are aware that they could themselves benefit from it, even though they knew it was available. Sort of questions about fairness. Well, why can they have it and I can't? And then that ties into the misunderstandings about them. But quite a few comments about, well, I'd have to change my provider, or I've got this kind of cost I can cope with on a mobile only solution. If I took the broadband thing, then I'd have to sort out my phone to keep the costs down. And actually there were lots of kind of real or misinterpreted or misunderstood, but their worries about what would happen if you shifted to the social tariff and how practical it would be. So I think there's something there to feed back to providers about making this as simple as possible for people, because I think if there's any of these practical barriers, people just may not want to do that. This is the point about physical infrastructure. This really did come out in some of our interviews, that, for example, if there's no local, this is an example one of the people I interviewed gave. There's no local pharmacy and the doctors is a good distance away. The people in the household have both got mobility and health issues. They're completely dependent on online prescriptions, etc., and so on. And also social contacts limited for them. So they pay to have some more TV subscriptions because that's the colour in their life, you know, etc. So it really struck me, definitely, that there's an interplay between what are the other resources that are available to the social housing tenants. If they just have to walk out of the tower block and there's a doctor and a pharmacy, and there's some other opportunities, or there's a community centre to do things, then they may have less dependence on digital than other people, and so on. And that kind of says to me that you've got to look at the set of things the household needs rather than just at giving them access or giving them skills. There's also quite a lot of talk about frustration with digital services. You know, the point I made earlier, people saying that they've given up trying to get a doctor's appointment because it's just so difficult and it's online. That's not great. So that's actually the previous meeting I said that in, not this one. You know, that's not great if that's what people are doing. That's health and well-being and so on. And we knew this would be the case, but it really came out that different households, different community members may have much greater demands on digital. If you've got children with special educational needs, or you're caring for a long-term person with long-term ill health, puts a load of additional demands on the household. So well-known issues remain: confidence and motivations. Older residents just seeing limited value of being online or investing more time in it. But often people don't see the benefits they could have. A lot of people's skills are still mainly self-taught, reliance on family and friends. And not all people really understand what the benefits of being online can be. But overall, we'd say there's lots of evidence that the focus really needs to be on households, not individuals. You know, households with children have one set of needs, caregivers, the person cared for, different sets of needs. And out of that, we also heard a lot of people saying we pay for the cheapest broadband we can get, but it stops, it jitters, it's not great, because by the time two kids are online doing homework and I'm watching something on telly, it just kind of falls over. So again, there was a thinking about the whole package for a household. So our reflections, there's a lot of complexity on the ground, and I think that's always the case. It's not a reason not to do things, but I think it's a reason to say that it might be hard to see what simple solutions, and the cost of living crisis is definitely there. Pressures on frontline staff. Also, that a social tariff offer on its own just may not be enough. There's got to be the community element. There's got to be the skills element. There's got to be a targeting, maybe more separate from just you're available to it, a targeting of getting the people to engage with it. And household composition, I think, needs to be thought about. And lastly, this is more anecdotal, but there's a kind of, I would argue, there's a bit of a perception that a social tariff is essentially a functional thing. It's to keep you online so you can get services, etc. If that's or it's going to be at such a low level that you'll only be able to use a small amount of devices or whatever. So what's better than, is that really any better than my current circumstance when I have data some months and I don't have the other? And is it really worth 15 quid if I don't get some colour in my life from it? But also, even people who are interested, that £15 price point at the moment may still be too high for some of the people we've spoken to. And that would be it. I did rattle through those. Very happy to take lots of questions if needed. How do I stop? I've stopped sharing. There we go. It's worked. I can see a hand from Michelle.
Hi, yes, thanks so much for sharing all that. It's really insightful, and I think a lot of it is quite familiar to a lot of us looking at digital inclusion at the moment. But just reflecting on that last comment that you made, that £15 is even kind of outside of people's budget, which I think as well we all know of at the moment for certain groups of people. What would your suggestion be in those terms? I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here.
Well, I'm not sure the answer is to give a price. I think the answer is to think about how we all collectively work together to solve that. I mean, it could be that, you know, what's the financial benefit to the social housing provider, to the local government, to Greater Manchester to have people online? So is there to national government to having people online? So is there some way we can work with the ISPs to make that price affordable, you know, and so on? I mean, if you look at the survey stuff that came back from Stockport and you look at the Ofcom data, somewhere between 6 and 12 looks like a price point that a larger proportion of people might be more comfortable with. Though the caveat though, but if there's something else with it, like I get a free Netflix with it, well then I might, you know, pony up the extra pounds or two and so on. I think, you know, the conversation I had with the people doing, this is outside of Greater Manchester, doing the AltNet stuff in Sheffield, was to be able to run it at a price that collectively they would be happy with. But the key point being then they've got control over it and they know what speed people are getting, and that they don't have to, there isn't a kind of two-step thing between the social housing provider, the person having an ISP and it all working. It's kind of one package. So yeah, I do think there's something there about getting it inside what people are prepared to pay for, you know. And it goes right back to, I mean, Sedo did this stuff in social housing in Sheffield back in 10, 15 years ago, and the social housing reps said something very clearly there. They said, give us broadband for £3 a week or £2.50 a week that'll just do everything you want us to do for accessing services on our rent, yeah, and we'll probably pay for it. If we want fancy stuff on top of that, we'll pay some more, but don't expect us to go online and do services online. If you ain't providing it, we'll still walk down the office. And I'm not sure that argument hasn't disappeared.
Thanks, Sam. Sarah, you've got your hand up? Would you like to come in?
Yeah, it was just on that point. Obviously, some people around the room were with us on Friday and we met with our MP and our ISP who's providing our project, which is VMO2. And one of the discussion points was around costing, and obviously the internet service providers are commercial businesses as well, so they have to generate an income, and we appreciate that. But also what they did raise was the fact that the VAT on these costs could make a huge difference if government were lobbied enough to make that difference, the same as they have done for all other energy providers. So it's a real good argument, in my view, that would then reduce the cost to the end user. And potentially make it more affordable. Just my view.
Yeah, Kira.
Yeah, cheers, John. Thanks very much for that, Sim. I'm sorry I came in a bit late to the meeting, so I missed the first bit. So please forgive me if I'm sort of bringing up something that has been amply covered already. But I thought that the point that you made in that presentation around kind of the whole context that someone is living in is a really important one. And I would love to kind of explore that a little bit more. And I'm sure you will do as the project evolves, because the fact that people might need different kinds of connectivity based on the kind of community they live in is actually really important, I think, for all of us who are thinking about kind of the digital city as a whole and really taking an ecosystem approach to thinking about digital inequality. And I think realistically, we kind of treat connectivity as disconnected from other things like the availability of doctors' offices nearby and grocery stores and things like this. And so I found that finding particularly interesting and would love to hear more if you have any thoughts on it at the moment, but just kind of flagging that it's something that I think would be great to draw out a bit more in the course of the project. It also dovetails a bit with some very, very preliminary findings that are emerging from the research I was conducting at the Ada Lovelace Institute before I joined Manchester City Council, which is where I am now, that is kind of showing that there's a sort of digital postcode lottery in the sense of people are having very different experiences based even on the street they live in a particular neighborhood. And it's not just about like, is there fiber running down my street? It is also about whether there's convenient healthcare and things like this. And that really impacts the reliance, as you pointed out, on connectivity. And so I just see that as being a potentially very valuable way for us to start thinking properly about digital exclusion as a whole of society issue as opposed to a siloed issue. So really just wanted to flag that as being a really interesting finding. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks, Keir. Yeah, I think it highlights the fact this is a discovery piece, and it's one that we want to discover with all of you and with all you, bringing in inputs from everybody's experience to add value and weight and to our findings. So plenty of food for thought there, Sim. Thank you very much for that presentation.
Let me just jump in, just to say, because I just saw a Lancashire and Cumbria person just disappear off the chat saying they had to leave. But there was some work done by some colleagues in sort of Cumbria about the difference in experience between, what on the ground is supposed to be the level of connectivity and people's experience, and how being rural added a complexity to that. It just because you've now got the basic, required government, whatever it is, 10 megabit or something speed to an area, doesn't necessarily benefit people if essentially you then turn all of their face-to-face services off because they're online, and that there's the experience then becomes a frustration rather than a gain. So I think there's a question there for social housing providers about this is your stock, this is the available infrastructure, this is the services in the area. For local government, this is the services in the area. For Greater Manchester, this is the services in the area. What's the package look like for those people who live around there?
Yeah, I noticed, Christopher, you've got your hand up. Is there a point you'd like to make? Oh, you're on mute.
Hello, it's just something I wanted to add from what Kira said, really, to everyone. I'm relatively new, about a month into the industry and dealing with any type of data or digital poverty. So as a field exercise, I decided to cross-reference the number of patients per GP to the UK average wage index to the UK Consumer Digital latest report on very low digital skills, and there's a direct correlation with the people that have very low digital skills, low socioeconomic background, and high numbers of GP patients per GP. So it's definitely a thing. Lincolnshire have just produced a report that's saying that they have over on average 2,500 patients per GP in their area, with over 20% of their population with no connectivity. So it's definitely something that I feel needs to be looked into and cross-referenced more. From my experience, and this is quite refreshing, it's the first Manchester webinar that I've been on. I've been on quite a few to try and find my feet. And it's quite nice to hear the fact that you're talking about a multitude of different people, as opposed to just the what I would consider urbanites and built-up areas. And there seems to be a lot of focus on that.
Yeah. I think thanks, Christopher. Yeah, thanks for your input on that. I'm conscious that I know that Sarah Woolley may have to leave early, so I'd like to bring you in, Sarah, perhaps to talk a little bit about your experiences in Wythenshawe. You mentioned about the visit before, and it would be great to get your kind of insights about what's happening on the ground there and your views.
Sure, I have done a few slides as well, so I'll try and share those. Just give me a second. Can people see those? Yeah?
We can see them, Sarah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so
You've just got to put them in presentation mode, Sarah.
have I? 1 second.
Perfect.
Are we on? Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
cool. So just for us, obviously, we're partnered with Virgin Media O2 as part of the pilot scheme, one of the 5 across Greater Manchester. So we were really pleased to be selected for that. just some data that we collated earlier in the year, so that we could match that against how well we weren't doing well or not. We could make a decision on that. Basically, 58% of our tenancies did have an email at the start of this pilot project. We didn't know the validity of all those email addresses. We have one on record. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's how they contact us, but at least we have some view of how many of our tenancies were accessible through email. And we have developed an app for our tenants as well. And at that point in April, earlier this year, March, April, we had 3,061, which is representative of 22.3% of our tenancies. So again, some of them were digitally active using mobile devices as well as computers. And just using that app, we had about 11% doing repairs ordering and 23% doing their rents payments. So we did a bit of analysis last week against some of those statistics. And as of last week, we've now gone up 3% on the tenancies registered with an email address, which is showing some positive impact, I suppose. Not saying it's attributed to the work that we're doing. But what is a good positive is the fact that most of obviously some of our tenants are now using our app a bit more. And we've seen an increase. However, we've seen a decrease in rent payments through the app. So we don't know what that is down to at the moment, and we could do some more digging on that. I reckon it's probably something to do with the cost of living crisis, if I'm perfectly honest. What we're doing in the community in relation to digital activity and some statistics based on our local community digital hub, which is Benshill Community Centre. This time last year, we only had 138 learners that were regularly coming into the centre to do some activity within our computer suite and with our digital tutors. This year, we've seen an increase of up to 207. That's quite a considerable increase. We've put some of this down to the fact that we are doing additional work that also needs to support communities, and what we've recognised people need to be doing online. So since June this year, we've actually been a centre for the Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service. So people that have got tribunals for their benefits applications and reviews, those have quite a quick turnaround. So our tutors have been supporting with those. In the whole country, there's been 1,050 of those applications done online, those supported through these centres across the whole of Britain. We've actually done 48, which is 5% of the national figure. And out of all of those that we've helped submit, they've all been given a 10 out of 10 score. So we are helping to make some impact on people's lives through digital activity within our own facilities. We also started with the Data Bank initiative in September, and we're given 120 SIM cards from a couple of internet service providers, digital providers, O2, 3, Vodafone. They gave us a range of offers, including free data, and some of them have also given free phone calls and text messages, and that's for 6 months, over 18s and on a low income or claiming benefits. To date, up to the end of last week, we'd actually issued 32 of those. On top of that, our own housing team have been using recycling our digital devices, mainly our mobile phones, so that if anybody is struggling with a device to get that data operational, we've been giving them a device alongside it. Up to last week, I think we'd issued 20 mobile devices that we don't expect them to return those, they can keep them. And the way we're gathering all our referrals at the moment is through our housing colleagues and our different teams within the housing departments, repairs and maintenance team when they're out and about. We're also taking referrals from our food banks on site and our winter warmer. Sim mentioned about drop-in sessions where we're helping tackle cost of living. Well, Benshill Community Centre do that on a regular basis 3 times a week. So we're seeing quite a high footfall of people that are struggling, not just with the cost of living, but also with their digital. So what we're doing is talking to people in the community to ask them how they're managing, whether we can help them. We'll help them in the centre, but then we're obviously seeing if they will then become eligible as a tenant potentially for our programme with Virgin Media O2. So what we've done so far Virgin Media have developed a social tariff, but they've actually done 2 levels. So there's a lower level, which is for a smaller household that doesn't need as much data, and then a larger tariff. They've also going to add on a bolt-on. I think we were talking about some social interaction that people have at home and those nice to haves. They are going to be having a streaming offer as well at a low cost. But that's not being rolled out by us, that's being rolled out by Virgin. We've identified over 5,000 tenancies that are eligible for the social tariff. So we've sent out a letter that's going out this week. We've done meetings with our customer hub where the calls will hopefully start coming in. And they've been briefed on what kind of questions tenants might ask about the digital offer and how it will benefit them. One of the main things that we've been doing over the last few months is working alongside the digital champions from Virgin Media O2. So the champions have been coming over to Wythenshawe every Friday and helping support a few of our sessions across the area. So they're now geared up, ready to go it alone basically, and hopefully work across Wythenshawe in drop-in sessions supporting people, and hopefully they will be dropping in to do the sign up for the social tariff sign up for our tenants. We've also got promotion in our main receptions at the housing group head office, because we do still get customers obviously coming in through the front doors. Not everything is done online, so we're trying to make sure everything that we're offering and those promotions and opportunities and activities are there for everybody, and not just those that live around by the community centres where they're actually being delivered. And there's 2 workstations now that have also been established at the reception area of head office, and the idea is that the Virgin champions will be there on a Friday to help sign up and support people with the Virgin Media offer, but also with any other digital issues that they might have. What next? So we have got a digital inclusion officer. We're very fortunate. I did say last week if I could clone Alistair, then I would give everybody an Alistair. He's amazing. But we've also got IT tutors and the digital champions in place to support across the area. Currently, we do run 15 drop-in sessions over 16 sites. So that's quite well attended, and they range from community centres to job centres to supported housing schemes to our head office. The focus groups began last week with Sim and his team with older people, disabled and vulnerable residents, and that's going to support some of the baseline data collection. We've also put some stuff on our web pages for WCHG, so obviously those tenants that have got access to it can share it with people, and tenants that haven't got access, maybe point them in the right direction for our data bank initiative with the Good Things Foundation, and also our drop-in sessions and how they can support our communities. We've also developed some other partnerships as well as this pilot project. We're currently working very close with Manchester City Council colleagues and Manchester Adult Education on a digital booklet, which is highlighting all of the sessions across Wythenshawe, not just the ones that we're delivering. And that's going to go out in winter warmer packs to the most vulnerable residents that potentially are going to be digitally excluded. So there's going to be at least 1,000 of those printed, and there's also going to be online availability to that. And that links in with all other community voluntary organisations and statutory services across Wythenshawe. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we have been looking at gaining support from our MP, Mike Kane. He's going to be sharing our good practice and our partnership working with ourselves, Virgin Media and Manchester City Council, and he's agreed to be our voice over in London. And basically, our aim is to get this as the 4th utility, digital inclusion and access to decent broadband. And then obviously what we will do is we will continue to enhance the offer, obviously through Benshaw Community Centre and our Good Things Foundation work that we're doing, that's ongoing. We are open to the wider community for a range of support. So we will support with a range of things, from getting them online, getting them their own access and making them more self-sufficient for themselves. But also if they are struggling, then we will set them out a learning path for themselves where they can achieve greater things digitally and hopefully become more independent from our drop-in sessions. we're continuing to run things like work clubs and functional skills alongside those digital sessions. And as I said, we've got 6 sites, 5 days a week, drop-in and one-to-one support. And we're obviously linked into a number of networks, including the local digital skills network and Manchester City Council. The DigiSure work is really picking up pace, and the enhanced offer from the digital champions at Virgin Media, which has been really, really good. And really well received by the champions, us as Wythenshawe Housing, and also our tenants and residents in the area. And that's me.
Many thanks, Sarah. That's fantastic. I think it kind of highlights the fact that number one, it's a discovery piece, and complex problems like digital inclusion require, in many cases, complex solutions, you know, ways in which you can work with various organizations in order to get everything working optimally, and particularly if we're going to make this sustainable as well. It is really important to know what your ecosystem looks like, and clearly from your point of view, Sarah, you'll be able to kind of leverage the kind of value of the social housing provider and its connections with other organizations to bring them into the fold, because as I say, it's a complex position. This, I don't know. Yeah.
One of the, can I just say as well, one of the other things with Virgin Media O2, they are one of the major providers in our area, so it's clearly that's where our partnership had to lay with, really. And they do cover a lot of the area, but there are certain parts of our communities that aren't covered by Virgin Media. And what we've been able to do with those conversations now is highlight to the organisation where those gaps are, and obviously overlaying their data with our data, we can clearly see where the gaps are and where they maybe need to look at their infrastructure for future development. And that's how we're working at the moment. So it's working really well, to be fair.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I know, Sarah, that you might have to drop off, so I just wonder whether there are any questions directly to Sarah about the work she's been doing here. I noticed in the chat that Harry was saying it'd be great to make contact. I don't know if you've got anything to say, Harry, on that. No, just want to make contact with you.
I've dropped my email in the chat anyway.
That's fantastic.
Happy to chat to anybody about all of this. So yeah, just give us a notification.
Dave, from the Health and Care Commission, do you want to make a point?
Yeah, just sounds really interesting and fantastic what you're doing in Wythenshawe. And I put in the chat earlier on, coincidentally, I've got a meeting tomorrow in Wythenshawe around about connecting GPs, connecting patients of GPs to the NHS app, and how we might work in a sort of connected way, you know, with the community assets that are in Wythenshawe. So I'd definitely be trying to drag you into that meeting if possible, or further conversations anyway.
I do work with our local GP because obviously digital isn't just my job. I do a lot of things. Few people know I do a lot of things. One of them is working on health programs as well. So happy to talk with you. I've been working with the LCO on a number of things, and local GPs. I've got an inroad into them as well. So.
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, thanks, Ed, and thank you very much, Sarah. I don't think there are any other questions that have come up here. I know that Simeon, I think, is going to talk a little bit about the developing responses now from the internet service provider. Is that right, Sim? Or have you covered that?
No, it actually wasn't so much saying something as asking the question. Really, it was an opportunity to ask the question, really, too, because I too have to drop off shortly, unfortunately, because I'm interviewing some new researchers. Was really to ask the question to internet service providers, given what they've heard so far in the last kind of this session and the previous sessions and things, is kind of reflections on that, you know, and how that fits. It's kind of like prelude to coming to talk to you after Christmas about your perception from the site, you know, of the project from your side. So it really wasn't so much to say anything specific, but just to throw down the question of how does what everything we've found and said, and what Wythenshawe have said this week and Stockport said the previous week, etc. Does this chime with you, etc., or responses to thoughts on a postcard, please?
Yeah. Jody.
Go on then, Simeon. I'll step up if you want an ISP response, although it's my response rather than an official response. But I guess it's following on from what Sarah said, and I think one of the big things, certainly from my perspective with this project, has been that the importance of the partnership between us and Wythenshawe as a housing association to make any inroads into this project that we feel will have traction has been absolutely invaluable. It's like you've seen through Sarah's slides, the efforts that they go to from a digital inclusion point of view already without any input from us, with things like the digital learning, are already over and above what a lot of people, I imagine, have got in place. But that relationship, it allows us to reach residents in a completely different way, and an almost a validated way that takes us out of that box of being a comms company that's just after the contents of your wallet, to someone who's working with people you trust, and someone who you recognize as tries to give you help. So I think that the pilot proves that we can make an inroad, and we can have an effect, but it's not down to us as an organisation, as an ISP, to deliver that. It's about the relationships that we can build between private sector and public sector to try and address these issues, because we all appreciate there is no one box solution that fits. It's like the variety of stuff that we are trying as we work through this trial, and the reason behind having layered offers that are either basic through to more accommodating data packages. Do you want extras added onto it? A social tariff doesn't take you out of the need for entertainment. It in some ways enhances it. And fixed line or mobile, you can't go one is better than the other, because in certain situations both are true. So you have to have that huge variety. And I think from where you were looking at reflecting on the project today earlier, you were almost in a way being a little bit harsh on the project, in the sense that if you started over, you would know more about matching people up, because this was a test and learn. It wouldn't matter how hard you tried, you can't match an ISP to give the right solution to a community, because there's too much variety in the community. And it's about the fact that the next phase of this opens up all of those offers to all of those communities, right? And that's where you start to hit real inroads, where you've got that effectively competitive market choice from all of those providers, all working in partnership with people to try and achieve it. And you start to see proper inroads. So there you go. There's my bit.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. That's much appreciated. I know that we had Alexander Muirhead on the call from Hyperoptic, but I think he had to leave the call, which is a shame. But we, obviously, as Jody was saying, we're working across the market here, because it's competitive, but it means that it does mean that residents ultimately have a choice of service provider, and each has got their strengths and weaknesses, like I'm sure they'll readily admit. What we're going to do as part of the next session is engage with, have a similar session now with the internet service providers to get their thoughts on some of the research findings that we've had too, and on an equally open basis as this is. Is there anybody else from internet service provider side that would like to make any points? John.
Yeah, hi everybody. Yeah, I just wanted to come in just from a perspective of the Digital Champions program that Sarah was referencing, and this actually all came about from the pilot that we're going now. It's just to highlight the fact that we've actually changing policy within Virgin Media O2 business about how we dedicate and offer our volunteering support. It's been a big move from litter picking and painting and decorating and helping out to actually doing something from a digital perspective. And I believe that other telcos are going to do the same thing. So the fact now that our colleagues, and I've got one of my colleagues who's running this program on the call, who are actually delivering this, it was done in collaboration with Wythenshawe. They spoke to Alistair, who's the Digital Inclusion Officer. They came to offices at Greater Manchester Combined Authority to work out how can we do a really effective digital champion program and making sure it's having the same impacts that we want to have from the customer perspective to also, you know, from a social citizens perspective, access into services, etc. So I just sort of commend the fact that that's happened. We're now seeing how that's impacting and making sure that this is a sustainable model, that eventually every volunteer in Virgin Media O2 business and Virgin Media O2 have 5 days a year which they can utilise. You're talking about 100,000 days worth of support which could be given to digital inclusion nationally. And I believe Jess is on here from Essex. I think work's going to happen in Essex now. There's talk in Birmingham and there's colleagues on Birmingham here. How can we utilise this resource to support your local initiatives? So I just wanted to flag that point.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, John. So it's open now to any questions that anybody else might have to either Sim or Sarah, if she's still here. Jodie.
Yeah, it was a quick one, really aimed more at Simeon, I think, and it's coming from the view that this partnership that you've developed with the ISPs to broker a response. Is there any thoughts as to how you could do the same sort of thing from a device perspective, which isn't necessarily our forte, but where you've got those nationwide companies that might be able to offer the support?
Good question. I mean, I can say something that we're about to try and do at the university. I'm fingers crossed we're going to get the money for it, because we've got some extra money from government for doing policy-facing work. As part of my attempt to grab that cash, one of the things we've been talking to Good Things Foundation about is that they've been encountering kind of mixed results in trying to get people to reuse and refurbish devices. So, I mean, it was mentioned before, people refurbishing devices. Good Things have managed to get the Met Police to agree to refurbish, you know, smartphones. So we can solve it for the Met Police. We can probably solve it elsewhere. So one of the things we're going to have a look at if we get the resources between now and summer is what is best practice? You know, what are the legal, practical GDPR obstacles that have to be overcome, you know, etc., to make that a viable kind of circular economy type business model for large organizations who've, you know, depreciated the value of the capital kit over 4 years to zero, but it's still in good working order. How can then they recycle that into the community? That said, quite a few times we've talked to people about that. The response has come back that actually, cost-wise, it's just as easy to get current basic kit, you know, brand new, completely basic kit, and use that fresh. In terms of the cost of the process of cleaning the equipment is the same price as a basic laptop. So I think there's a conversation there, I think, to have about, you know, what can work. You know, there were quite a few charitable interventions by big IT firms during COVID around education to get kit into schools and so on, etc. But again, it goes back to the point I keep making, and I know loads of people around the call make regularly. It's long-term sustainability. You know, if a local community or housing provider or local government is in a, you know, is reliant on a provider to provide this stuff, but then they change where they want to put their charitable focus, suddenly and infrastructure disappears overnight. So I think that's my couple of reflections. But what we're going to try and do to contribute to that is have a little think about writing a booklet or something that says this is best practice on setting up a recycling kind of approach, because we've heard of things that have gone well and things that have gone disastrously badly. So if we could collect that learning, might help. I'm not sure if that's exactly answering your question, Jodie.
Doesn't have to be exact, Simeon. It was more whether you were looking at that side of the equation, I guess, through the project.
So I can probably come in there. So I lead the Greater Manchester Digital Inclusion Agenda. I think there's a role here, Jodie, for local government as well as national government and the whole ecosystem. So in Greater Manchester, we've got 10 boroughs. I'm not sure if any of them are, well, I can see Tracy's on this call, so it might be good to get your thoughts, Tracy. So we have got 10 local digital inclusion leads, one in each of the boroughs, because we believe that nobody can really understand the needs of local residents as local councils themselves and their local ecosystems. We, as a combined authority, we can convene, we can galvanise, and there is power in that. But also there's a need to understand kind of what exists and working with what exists, because there's been digital inclusion work happening for decades. But the point was, how do we come together around some of those key challenges like access to devices, data poverty, access to essential digital skills and digital skills training locally within communities. So that part of the response around access to devices does lie with a role for local authorities as well as that local ecosystem. I can tell you the complexity of, or the variety of systems that we've put in place. So we've got some of the local leads have got recycling, work with recycling organisations, because this is about, look, there's always going to be a focus. Thank you, Sim. Thank you so much. There's always going to be a need for devices. There's always going to be a need for connectivity. So some of the local authorities have been purchasing devices, and certainly at the start of the pandemic, we all had to look at where that need was. But we also came up with the challenges of funding around purchasing devices, as well as supply of those devices. When we spoke to some of those larger corporations, they were not able to get devices quite quickly. So we set up a technology fund for schools, for example, to be able to get address that need for young people pretty swiftly. There's also device lending schemes, and this is about people that can't afford to have the devices themselves. So local libraries, for example, some of them run device lending schemes. So there are a multitude of offers locally where people could either get access to devices on a temporary basis, but also there are local charities that help support particular people. So I think there's a role here around connecting in with what's happening locally around the offer for devices. But I just wanted to come in on one particular point here. So from a policy perspective, now we're always talking to national government. We have seen the focus around emergency responses. This pilot has really been put in place because of the need to look at what is sustainable beyond emergency responses to support people that are living in poverty, because we need to ask ourselves a bigger question around, that we didn't have to ask ourselves 3 years ago, or that certainly when we spoke to internet service providers, as yourselves and those within this pilot, we all weren't thinking around addressing digital poverty as we are now, and also what our role is in this. So been talking to local government just last week and them saying, well, if we give you some devices, what can you do with it? But the conversation we want to have is not about, we can take your 60 devices and support people. We want to have conversations around, how do we as a society help support people that are living in poverty and low incomes. This is about social inclusion, not just digital inclusion here. And with the cost of living crisis, a lot of these challenges and crises that we're seeing is turned into quite an emergency response. So in short, there's a role for local government and regional government. What we're asking national government for and ISPs is to see the benefits of working with locally, to be able to reach people and increase participation. It's not just about kind of the provision of social tariffs. We recognise they work for some people, they don't work for all. So for those that it doesn't work with, can we have a better conversation around how we can reach people and help support them around participation? Because what it means is access to healthcare, and it also means you know, it's a contributor to digital exclusion, is a contributor to and an outcome to digital to poverty. Sorry. Michelle, did you have your hand up? I don't know if you did.
Yeah, I did, and it was just kind of raised on the devices front about the Good Things Foundation's device bank that they're building at the moment. I understand they're piloting in a few areas, but just to address the previous point that was raised around, do you purchase new or do you recycle old? We're having a really big focus in Birmingham in recycling the old as kind of a response to the growing e-waste problem that we have in the UK. But also one of the key problems that we see with old devices kind of not working is just people need to get in there and clean them out properly. So there can be some very simple things that people can do to bring an old laptop back to life. Just, you know, replace batteries and phones, and then they work much better. So I think it's good for us to be mindful that these repair workshops and things like that, and teaching people how to troubleshoot and repair their own devices should be a forefront of our minds as well.
Thanks, Michelle. Tanya, I see you on the screen. I wondered if you wanted to come in. A particular question I wanted to ask, and I know we heard from Sarah earlier, but probably quite in a good position, like Sarah, in that you've already got activity, you've already you've already got a real engagement with your community going. And I just wondered, I know Sim has left the call, but there are social housing at different parts of that journey in terms of connecting in with people and engaging with people. And I just wondered if you had some of your own experiences and reflections that you wanted to share.
Yeah, thanks, Bina. In terms of engaging with local people, one of the things that we've really found quite consistently is that there's no point parachuting people in from outside the community to try and deliver information to people or skills training or whatever it might be. It really needs to come from within the community, which I know was mentioned earlier. That's absolutely key for us. Quite a few of our neighbourhoods, and I'm sure this is true of many social housing providers, people don't necessarily... Sorry, my kids are both off poorly and they're just knocking things about in the kitchen. Sorry. They both, so I completely lost my thread now. I was going to say, sorry.
You were saying the importance of not bringing people in, but actually using the existing trusted communities.
People often have lives that revolve around their local neighbourhood. They won't necessarily come into the town centre or travel into any nearby towns for any purpose at all. So if the service isn't available locally, or the person isn't somebody that they know, they won't necessarily travel elsewhere to find that service. So it's really important that we deliver things where people are, and that we also deliver them through trusted local people. So one of the things we found with the pilot is that although we had an offer of having some ISP support through staff volunteering, actually we've asked them if they can fund local people to be able to deliver those sessions in the neighbourhood rather than bringing unknown people in to do it. And as was mentioned earlier, I just totally endorse the fact that linking into existing groups is far more effective than trying to create something new. So where there's already a coffee morning or a family group or whatever it might be, it's much more effective to go and have a chat with them because they're already meeting, they already know each other and they feel safe in that place. And so talking to people in that environment and then gaining the trust over time and then linking whatever they're doing to digital, because there's always a digital angle to whatever that group might be talking about, has been really effective for us in the past, and that's something that we're using in the neighbourhood that we're particularly focusing on through the pilot as well.
Thank you, Tanya. And some of your findings showed the high level of people that simply didn't want to have the internet.
Yeah, that's right, Beanie. Yes, so we did a large scale survey over the sort of spring and summertime this year, and although we expected digital people who weren't on the internet to be relatively high, it was actually a quarter of our tenants in those neighbourhoods. So that's a really high figure, both in terms of people who aren't accessing any information services support on the internet, but also people from a business side who aren't accessing any of Stockport Homes' services online. So clear that for us, that's provided an extra push around why this is such important insight, because it's not only around working out in the communities and supporting people to access a lot of the benefits, whether it's financial or social, but also as a business, we need to be really careful that we aren't moving towards a completely digital offer, that we are actually having a variety of really excellent ways that people can get in touch with our services, and that we might want to improve our digital offer, but that doesn't mean it's the exclusive way that we want to push people towards. We really need to provide excellent services out in the community, face to face and over the phone, because that's what people consistently prefer. Even those who are online really like ringing us up because they get a good service and they want to talk to somebody and know that their query has been dealt with by a human being. And I don't think we should try to move away from that too much, because it offers something to people that they don't get elsewhere. I think just one last point, particularly with the cost of living. So, for example, we've put messages on our contact centre when you ring up and you get the recorded message to start with before you go into the different options. We changed that message a few months ago to make it make people aware that if they wanted to, they could chat to any of the advisors about a money related issue, even if that's not actually why they were ringing. And that has had a noticeable impact on the number of queries relating to cost of living that people have raised with the advisor. And that's not necessarily something you could do as effectively digitally, whereas because people have been having a chat about repair, they've then brought up the fact that their shower's not working, and that's a really big problem because they can't afford to run the bath. And these little things that affect people's lives, that we can get the nuances because we're actually talking to a human being and not doing it online. So it's been a really important learning thing for us.
That's really important. Thanks, Tanya. And I think just that level of having a conversation and, you know, having a human element to interactions is really important, and has really kind of come to the fore, especially when it comes to what we're seeing and hearing on the ground, are people simply not engaging, and simply not engaging with their doctor's surgery because they find it difficult to, and there's not an alternative option for them, or they're missing GP appointments. So there is, and I know we spoke about primary care earlier on, but having, you know, the role of social housing providers as being that touch point and support for vulnerable people, it really kind of forces us to rethink our roles and actually, you know, who is best placed to have those conversations. And I think the other part of this is what we're hearing is around safety and online safety, and people not wanting to go online because they simply fear being scammed. And there's an online and offline element, obviously, to that. But there's more connectivity that we are doing in Greater Manchester around making sure that that confidence and safety element comes into it. There's 5 minutes left, and I'm conscious that we've got quite a few on this call, and I'm really keen to see if there's any more reflections or work that you want to share from different areas. Please pop your hand up if there is. I know there's a few conversations going on in the chat. Tracy, can you hear us? Or Michael? Michael, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in? Hi, Michael. You're on mute.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I did not start at the beginning, but I've been on the call close to about an hour now, and it's been very, it's been a fantastic conversation, and there's so much insights to sort of like take from it. One of the things I just want to quickly add, because I'm from Manchester, I'm from the Manchester Council, it's just regards to health and the whole inclusion drive across the healthcare system, and with the massive work the NHS is doing. However, I noticed that there hasn't been much of would I say clear approach into how to reduce the burden on the healthcare ecosystem itself. And since the Hive NHS Hive has been introduced, and around digital inclusion that supports it, one of the big factors is data. And within that data, one of the one of the lingering problem around that data, and which is causing a massive burden, or creating a massive burden across the healthcare and the NHS. And like Sarah earlier said about GPs having about 2,000 plus client within their ecosystem as well. So in regards to that, one of the things I found very interesting is, and from an African perspective, I noticed there has been quite a lot of Africans coming into the UK, and having said that, there's little or no history about them. And when I mean little or no history about them, health-wise, we don't have their health record. There is nothing practically about them. So, but because there has been a long-standing record-keeping procedure or process within the NHS and the UK, which is then, for example, my daughter, who is 6, all her record from when she was born, all is intact. NHS has that. But in many of these African countries, they don't have that sort of hands-on healthcare compared to the NHS. So again, there is absence of healthcare record, existing or previous healthcare record, regardless of wherever country they are coming from, and that would continuously create a burden within the NHS ecosystem, because then to carry out a precise healthcare, you need to then understand if there is a pre-existing condition, and to then diagnose pre-existing condition without actually having any data or record of that individual, it makes it very, very difficult. So from an African perspective, because again, I work with an organization which is very, which is at the forefront of health solution, digital health solution. So what we've then done is look at how we can create a universal healthcare system that then helps capture, regardless of what country you are, that helps capture healthcare records, which then would create a more or lift the burden on the NHS, because then, for example, if somebody is coming from Kenya, because we've then been able to create this system that can then capture their existing record from where they're coming from, that can then be shared with the NHS, and that can give that NHS, give the NHS the first-hand insight into the existing record of individuals. And what that would then do is create a precise healthcare system.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I think I get the gist of the question. I think you that is a really important, data share in particular is a really important aspect of what we're looking at around vulnerability. When it comes to NHS now, I don't have NHS colleagues here on the call to comment, so it's certainly something that I wouldn't want to kind of put words in anyone's mouth, but there is work going on in terms of how can we better explore without opening up a whole can of worms. There are lots of challenges around digital transformation that opens up and explores, you know, more work and more collaboration that's needed, in particularly at this time, but actually going forward in terms of processes and in terms of access to health and access to care. So it's a really important question. Thank you for raising that. But we don't have colleagues here on the call. But I will say that we are connected in with our health and social care partnership in Greater Manchester. So it's an integrated care partnership, which is what it's now known as. And they are running some pilots across Greater Manchester to be able to look at, you know, in particular, primary care is one of those pilots that they're running to look at how can we better work together around access to primary care, but also patient records. So I will just say, you know, keep in touch. I'm sure when they are at a point, we'll get them to come and share. But it is an important question around, you know, how does digital inequalities kind of contribute to other existing challenges within systems and processes. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I know many of you have had to leave now. We're 2 minutes over, but I'll just say quickly, our next research sharing session will be at the end of January. Do keep in touch in the meantime. The next research session will be around internet service providers sharing some of the learnings as part of this pilot. So really look forward to that, because we can have those conversations around sustainability, and hopefully we'll be in a different position by then. And I think this has just opened up conversation, if anything, but more meaningful conversation around what is going to make the most impact and what is great, but actually what can we keep intact in terms of sustainability of offers. Thank you so much for joining us. If you all celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas to you, or hopefully you'll have a lovely break across the festive period. In the meantime, we'll also be popping this the recording of this research session on our website, and I know there's a link in the chat. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us. Have a great festive break, and we'll hopefully see you in January. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Bye now.